Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to week 8 of the course. We're coming down the home stretch. We've only got 3 weeks left. Hope you guys are starting to think about your papers. The one piece of advice I would give, and I know that virtually nobody, including myself, follows this, is to start early on it. If you can write, you know, a paragraph a day, even between now and when the paper's due, it's going to be way better than if you wait until the last week to write it, right? I'm guilty of that myself, but I can also tell you from experience that the earlier you start on it, the better the paper will be. I've only heard from one person regarding a particular paper topic they want to use, so I'm assuming that the majority of you are just going to follow one of the prompts, which is fine. But if you do have a topic, and you really want to focus on that topic, send me an email, ASAP, so we can talk about it a bit and make sure that it's a good paper topic. It's going to be kind of a short video this week. I mainly want to talk to you guys about Plato and the Republic. I know, what can you say about Plato, right? You guys probably already heard a lot about Plato. But I did want to say that you did a good job with the Rousseau and analyzing that in the light of the Star Trek episode. Essentially, you got it right. Most people recognize that, yes, the collective will, once you're actually in the Borg, was somewhat reminiscent of what Rousseau was talking about in the social contract, where you have sort of this general will who does everything for the common good of the group, but yet they don't have any sort of individual personality, right? Their will is just the will of the collective, which is essentially, in Rousseau's sort of normative picture that he's painting of the way society should be, that's kind of what he lays out, right? And you can't disobey the sovereign. And, of course, the sovereign in Rousseau is the will of the people. And it is the will of the people in the Borg as well. It just so happens to be that they needed to put, maybe for dramatic reasons even, they needed to put a face with it. So that's why you have the queen in the Borg, who is, and she even says, I am Borg, right? So she represents the collective will, some sort of manifestation of it. But you were right in saying that the difference is that Rousseau believes that you have to consent to be a part of that. So that's where the individual will ends for Rousseau, is when you actually consent to join into the society and support the collective will, whatever that is. And then there's also the question of, what do we, and this is, Rousseau plays with this idea, what are we talking about when we're talking about freedom? Well, he says that you have your natural liberty, which is, you do essentially what you want to do, and then you have civil liberty, which is what you have in the society, right, in the social contract, which essentially civil liberty is the protection, of the collective itself, right? So you're not going to be impeded from doing the things that you need to do to, carry out your lives, right? So you're, in a sense, you're exchanging your natural liberty for civil liberty, which is not all that different from, which Rousseau would probably not like me saying this, but it's not all that different from what Hobbes and Locke are talking about, right? So good job on that. I thought you did a nice job of analyzing that in that context, right? So yes, so it does represent the collective will, but it doesn't actually have the consent. And the interesting thing about it, if you think about, Rousseau, he intends his account to be a normative account, right? This is the way that it should be. And then we see this Borg, right, in Star Trek, and this is the way. I mean, it pretty closely resembles what Rousseau is laying out as far as the general will goes. And I'm willing to wager that the majority of us find it repulsive, right? I mean, even the android, thought that there's something wrong with this, right? Because, the loss of the individuality that's so important to all of us. So that's the real question, right? Is how do we maintain our individuality while still maintaining the advantage of the state? Rousseau sets out to answer that question, and to most people, I would say it's unsatisfactory. Okay, so moving from Rousseau's normative account to Plato's normative account of justice and what a city should look like, right? So I have some lecture notes up on Canvas, so if you guys want to just follow along with those, you can, or you can just look at them separately. Yeah, so, right, I mean, it's Plato, all right? So the quote I have up here, this is what you generally hear. It says, The safest general characterization of the European philosophical or the Western philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Right, so since Plato, 2,500 years ago, something along that 2,500 years ago, wrote all his dialogues. He addressed all these major, questions that human beings still grapple with today. Right, so rather than people going out on their, their new paths or whatever, they're just kind of building upon what Plato did a long time ago. Right, and a lot of people disagree with that, but there's some truth in it. Okay, just a quick biographical sketch. As I said, he lived about 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece. He founded the Academy, which is sort of the first university, the first college, I guess you could say, in Western society. Famously, he was a student and great friend of Socrates, right? And in the dialogues, which we'll talk about, Socrates is his mouthpiece in essentially every dialogue, with the exception of one, the Laws. But the vast majority of Plato's work is written and voiced through Socrates. Not only did he study under Socrates, but he also taught Aristotle. Right, so another giant in Western philosophy. Plato was wealthy, right? He grew up in an aristocratic family, and you can even perhaps see the results of some of that in his account of what an ideal government looks like. But I mean, he had the best teachers, right? So not only did he study with Socrates, but he also studied with Pythagoras from the Pythagorean theorem, and just sort of the golden age of classical thought. His writing doesn't take the form, and it's actually, his writing is actually quite accessible because of this, right? And you'll find that with a majority of the great thinkers, their writings are actually accessible. It's not, Kant, for example, trying to read Kant is like, he has his own language, so you have to kind of translate it. But anyway, the reason that it's so accessible is that Plato writes in the form of a dialogue, conversations, dialectic is another term for it. It's ideas are going back and forth between people in a conversation. And he never speaks in his own voice in the dialogues. It's always through the voice of Socrates or somebody else in the Laws. Okay, so this week we're looking at a very short selection from the Republic. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on the Republic. Right, and the Republic is Plato's most famous dialogue. Maybe the Apology is close. But essentially, the Republic, it's also his longest dialogue. The Republic is concerned with two questions. The first question is, what is justice, right? Is there this overarching idea of what justice is? Is it relevant to each society? Can one thing be just in one society and not just in another? And then Socrates also wants to know, is it the case that the people who are morally just, or things that are just, are they happier than people who are unjust, which is a question we think about all the time, right? Well, are the criminals, get away with all these, crimes and, outsmart the law and all that? Are they, the people who are willing to take advantage of other people? It seems like oftentimes in our society or in other societies that they seem to get ahead, right? And Socrates wants to know, are they really happier than people who live, just lives for the most part, right? And the Republic begins with a lot of, as usual, Socrates, he doesn't say this is what justice is in the beginning. He poses a question. This is really interesting. Glaucon, what do you think justice is? Adeimantus, what do you think justice is? Thrasymachus, what do you think justice is? And then he just sort of goes through and he sort of, what's what I'm looking for here? He takes apart their arguments. Right? He refutes their arguments. He says, well, let's follow that through, right? If what you're saying is true, then that would lead to this, and that would lead to this, and that leads into a contradiction. Doesn't really make sense. But he talks about justice. He actually gives a positive account of it, which is something that oftentimes in the dialogues doesn't happen, right? But in the Republic, Plato does give a positive account of justice, and he does it through a metaphor. He does it through the metaphor of the city, right? So he looks at justice both on a political level and justice on an individual level, right? And he sets out to describe what the perfect just city would look like, right? And what he does is he says, okay, there in any sort of city, there are going to be different parts, different people playing different roles, right? So you have sort of the artisans, the craftspeople, the workers who actually build the stuff that makes the society go. He thinks that you have the guardians, he calls them, right, who are sort of the protectors. You can think of them as the soldiers, police of the society, who keeps order in the society and protects it from enemies. And then finally, you have a special subset of the guardians who are the rulers, the philosopher kings, as he calls them. And Plato believes that those are the three key components of the city, right? And in order for the city to be just, there has to be a balance between those three. The people who are the workers should not be the kings, and the people who are kings should not be the workers and the guardians, etc., right? So he thinks everybody in their place doing what they're supposed to be doing leads to justice. It's a type of harmony. Things are doing what they're supposed to doing. They're in balance with one another. And Socrates believed that it was the same for individuals. He famously said that there are three parts to the human body, the human soul, right? One was our physical appetites. One is our spirit, right? The thing that animates us, our emotions, things like that. And then the final part is reason, right? And these correspond with the three classes of people in Plato's Republic, right? So physical appetites matches up with the guardians, or I'm sorry, the workers, the artisans who are actually doing the buildings, the physically doing things. Spirit, emotion tends to resonate with the guardians, and finally reason resonates with the philosopher king, right? And it's important to realize that Plato is not in favor, and he speaks quite ill of it in the Republic of democracy, right? He's not talking about a democracy. He's talking about a society that is essentially ruled by a monarch, a philosopher king, right? But it has all these different parts to it. Let's see, what else? There's something else I wanted to say. Of course, this is where the famous, if you guys have heard it, the allegory of the cave, right? And of course, you're not going to be reading the allegory of the cave for this part, but I'm sure you guys are all familiar with it, right? Remember where the people are chained down in the cave, and there's a fire in the cave, and they're forced to look at the wall, and there's a reflection of reality that is posted on the wall that they're looking at based off of what's going on outside of the cave, the shadows of that through the fire. And eventually one of the people breaks free, one of the people that's chained down into the cave. And he escapes from the cave, and he goes and he sees the world as it is, right? And then he returns to the cave to tell the people, hey, you got it wrong, you got it backwards. The world is actually this way. What you're looking at is just a reflection of the way that the world actually is. And of course, they kill him for it, right? So it's not a happy ending for the person who goes back into the cave. And Plato thought that this was a representation of the philosopher king, and philosophers in general, right? So they see the world as it is, not as through the reflection, but they see the true form of the world, right? And Plato's making the argument in this case with the philosopher king, going back to the Republic, that it's not enough. And oftentimes philosophers, can get caught up in admiration of the way that the world truly is, right? But in this case, Plato's saying that the philosophers actually have a responsibility to go back into the city or back into the cave, right, and try to help and rule the people, right? So that's why he includes the allegory of cave in this discussion of the Republic and justice. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I think that's all I have down for now. The section that I have you guys looking at today, so essentially over the next 3 weeks we're going to be asking this question: what is justice, right? What does justice actually mean? Well, perhaps the most prominent account, and the account that we see the most in human nature, is the account that's provided by Thrasymachus, right, in the Republic, when he's opposing Socrates. And essentially what Thrasymachus is saying is justice is whatever is best for the strongest, right? So it's might makes right, essentially. There's no sort of overarching concept of justice outside of the strong take what they want, and they have the right to it. Right? And you can also see this in other famous works of international relations and political theory. One is the Melian Dialogue, where the Athenians are talking to the Melians, and they say, this is the world that's been created. The just is for the strong to take what they want, and the weak have to obey. right? So that's the account of justice that's presented by Thrasymachus today. And I want you guys to compare what Thrasymachus is saying in this dialogue to this episode, the final episode of The Walking Dead of the last season. And I especially want you to pay attention to the final speech by the character Negan, right, in the New World, right, and what he says the New World Order actually looks like, and is that representative of what Thrasymachus is saying, and how would Socrates respond to Negan's contention? All right, have a good week. No quiz this week. If you guys have any questions, shoot me an email. Good luck on your papers.